For 20 years, I cooked for my family, cleaned their home, remembered everyone's birthdays, and quietly stood behind them in every family photo. I was the daughter everyone always expected to help, but never expected to thank. My younger brother, Daniel, was different. Mom treated him like he could never do anything wrong. Whenever he needed money, she gave it to him. Whenever he made a mistake, she defended him. And when Grandma needed someone to care for her, somehow, that responsibility always landed on my shoulders. I never complained because Grandma was the one person in that family who made me feel like I truly mattered. She would hold my hand and tell me, "One day, sweetheart, you'll understand why I asked you to be patient." I never understood what she meant. A few months before she passed away, Grandma called me into her room and asked me to sit beside her. She looked exhausted, but there was something unusually serious in her eyes. She took my hand and said, "Whatever happens after I'm gone, don't let them convince you that you don't belong." I laughed nervously and told her that nobody could ever make me feel that way, but Grandma only smiled. "Promise me," she whispered. I promised. 3 weeks later, she was gone. At the funeral, Mom cried in front of everyone. Daniel gave a speech about how much he loved Grandma, and I spent most of the day making sure everyone had food and coffee. Even at my own grandmother's funeral, I was still the one caring for everybody else. Then came the day of the will reading. Grandma's lawyer had asked the immediate family to gather at his office. I arrived early and quietly sat in the hallway. Mom and Daniel were already inside whispering. When Mom noticed me, her expression instantly changed. She walked toward me and said, "What are you doing here?" I reminded her that I was Grandma's granddaughter. She stared at me and lowered her voice. "This is family business. You don't need to be involved." I told her that Grandma's lawyer had specifically asked me to come. Mom stepped closer and said, "You're not going inside." I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. Mom actually stepped in front of the door and ordered me to leave. Daniel stood behind her, watching silently. For the first time in my life, I realized they weren't simply trying to ignore me. They were trying to erase me. And what happened next made me realize that Grandma had known exactly what they planned to do. Because just as Mom reached for the office door, the lawyer opened it from inside. He looked directly at my mother and calmly said, "No, she stays." The lawyer stared at my mother for several seconds before moving aside and letting me enter. Mom followed behind me, obviously furious. Daniel came in too, but he refused to look at me. I sat across from the lawyer while my mother immediately began talking. She said there had been some misunderstanding, and that Grandma had probably never intended for me to be involved in the estate. The lawyer didn't argue with her. He simply opened a folder and said, "Mrs. Turner, your mother was very clear about who she wanted present today." Mom fell silent. The lawyer then placed several papers on the table. "Before we read the will," he said, "there are a few things you need to understand." My heart began pounding. Grandma had apparently met with him several times during the final months of her life. She had changed certain parts of her estate, and she had left specific instructions about what was supposed to happen during the reading. Mom immediately asked, "What did she leave, Daniel?" The lawyer looked at her and replied, "We'll get to that." Then, he turned toward me. "Your grandmother also left a personal letter for you." I could barely breathe. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Grandma's handwriting. My hands were trembling as I opened it. The first line said, "If you are reading this, they have probably already tried to make you feel like you don't belong." I looked up at Mom. Her face had turned completely pale. I continued reading. Grandma wrote about the years I had spent caring for her, but she also revealed something I had never known. She knew Mom had been making financial decisions behind her back. She knew money meant for her medical care had vanished, and she knew Daniel had been receiving money from her accounts without telling me. Mom suddenly stood up. "That's enough," she said. The lawyer calmly replied, "No, it isn't." And then, he revealed the one thing Grandma had kept hidden from everyone, even me, that completely changed who was going to inherit her entire estate. The lawyer opened the final document and began reading. According to the last will and testament of Margaret Turner, he paused. Everyone in the room leaned forward. Then he said my name. I froze. Mom slammed her hand against the table and shouted, "That cannot be right." But the lawyer didn't even flinch. He simply looked at her and said, "Your mother signed it in my presence with 2 witnesses." For the first time, nobody in the room said a word, and I finally understood why Grandma had told me not to let anyone convince me that I didn't belong, because she had already made certain they could never push me out again. The lawyer continued reading. Margaret Turner leaves her primary residence, all remaining savings, investment accounts, and personal property to her granddaughter, Cassandra Turner. For a moment, I couldn't process what I had just heard. Mom stared at me, as though I had somehow taken something from her. Daniel finally looked up, his face filled with shock. Then Mom laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they refuse to accept reality. "She must have been confused," Mom said. "My mother would never do this." The lawyer reached into the folder and placed another document on the table. She wasn't confused. In fact, she specifically anticipated that someone might say that. He explained that Grandma had undergone a legal capacity evaluation shortly before signing the final will. She had been completely aware of her decisions. She had also recorded a private statement explaining why she was leaving everything to me. The lawyer played the recording. Grandma's voice filled the room. "I know my family will be angry, but Cassandra was there when nobody else was. She never asked what she would receive. She simply gave her time, her love, and her strength. I am not leaving her my home because I owe her something. I am leaving it to her, because she is the person I trust to protect what I spent my life building." I felt tears streaming down my face. Then Grandma said something that made Mom completely silent. "I also know about the money that disappeared from my accounts. I have forgiven the people responsible, but forgiveness does not mean pretending it never happened." Mom immediately looked at the lawyer. "You can't use that against me." The lawyer calmly replied, "I'm not using anything against you. I'm simply reading your mother's instructions." Daniel finally spoke. He admitted that he knew Mom had taken some of Grandma's money to pay his debts. He said he thought Grandma would never find out, but Grandma had known. She had kept records, and she had already instructed the lawyer to make sure the money was accounted for before the estate was distributed. Mom looked at me and said, "You knew about this?" I shook my head. "No," and that was the moment I realized something important. The person they had spent years treating like the least important member of the family was actually the one person Grandma had trusted the most. After the meeting, Mom followed me outside. She expected me to argue with her. Instead, I simply told her, "Grandma didn't leave me her house because she hated you. She left it because she knew I would never use it to hurt anyone." Mom didn't respond. Months later, I moved into Grandma's house. I kept her garden exactly the way she had planted it. I also created a small account from the estate to help people in our community who needed assistance, something Grandma had always done quietly. Daniel eventually apologized. Mom took much longer. We never became the perfect family, but I stopped trying to earn love from people who only valued me when I was useful to them. And that's what Grandma's final gift really was. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the money. It was the reminder that your worth isn't determined by how loudly other people recognize you. Sometimes, the person standing quietly in the background is the one who matters most. Never let someone else's favoritism make you question your own value. And remember, being kind doesn't mean allowing people to walk all over you. And if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have walked away or stayed to hear the will? Tell me in the comments and keep watching, because the final part is where everything comes out.